Thank you, Sharon, for sharing that really evocative opening for our discussion tonight. My name is Kim Goff, and I'm a learning program developer at the Royal BC Museum. And I'd like to welcome you and thank you all for joining us for tonight's discussion. I'm coming to you tonight from the Royal BC Museum, which is located on the territories of the Lekwungen, known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations. And as people are joining us from many different places, I'd like to invite you as well to take a moment and to think about the First Peoples on whose territory you are on tonight. Tonight I went for a short walk and I passed a field and saw camas flowers in bloom. And I thought about the sustainable agriculture and practices of the Indigenous peoples of this area. And I was grateful that those fields are still here for us today. Now, I'm looking for my share screen button, which has vanished. Oh, there we go. I found it on the far side, and it's here. Before we begin tonight's presentation, the panelists and I want to acknowledge the devastating impact that COVID-19 is currently having in India. On Monday, the country reported about 117 people succumbing to the disease every hour, and that's a figure that's probably underreported. Our thoughts are with the first responders, the healthcare workers, and those people who are suffering. And we call on the international community to support the calls for oxygen and for vaccine. Tonight, we're here to talk about another crisis facing the people of India, the farmers' protest. This is the largest protest in human history. And the protest is a reaction to proposed amendments to the laws that farmers, called kisans, feel will destroy their livelihood and impact consumers globally. I have three panelists tonight to help us understand more of the importance of the protest and the connections to the people of British Columbia. Sharnjit Kaur Sandhra is a PhD candidate in the Department of History at UBC and a sessional faculty in the Department of History at the University of the Fraser Valley. She's interested in looking at the effective experiences of museum visitors through a critical race theory lens and has a great passion for activist work and engagement in the community through academia and museum exhibits. Sharon also works as a coordinator at the South Asian Studies Institute at UVF and curates exhibitions at the Sikh Heritage Museum in the National Historic Site Gursikh Temple in Abbotsford, BC. Welcome, Sharon. Dupinder is a registered nurse with 23 years of varied nursing experience, including working with Fraser Health, Provincial Health Services Authority, and BC Emergency Health Services under the operations of the Ministry of Health. She sits on the board of trustees at the Surrey's Public Library and was the CEO of Nurse on the Go, Home and Healthcare Services in 2018, a company which she founded. Dupinder was raised in Surrey and has a passion for community service and advocacy. She's the founder of One Voice Canada Foundation, which helps support, create awareness, and advocate for international students. She's a director with a few nonprofit organizations and devotes her time to volunteer in the community, currently assisting with the farmers' protests and work around COVID. Welcome, Dupinder. Jindi Singh is the National Director for Khalsa Aid Canada. He was part of the original team in the UK where Khalsa Aid was founded. It's an international NGO with the aim to provide humanitarian aid in disaster areas and civil conflict zones around the world. Jindi moved to Canada in the early 2000s, and by 2017, the nonprofit was set up here as well. There are now 13 chapters across Canada who support local charities and nonprofits. Jindi, thank you. And thank you also for recommending this topic and for connecting us to the panelists tonight. Now we have a couple of questions for the panelists, but we invite those of you watching to put your questions again either into the chat or the Q&A, and we will address those towards the end of our discussion. Now, our first question, and I'm going to start with you, Jindi. If you could provide some information on the context of the farmers' protest and to the best of your knowledge, its impact.
So the farmers' protest actually started in areas like Punjab back in the summertime. The actual laws that were considered controversial were passed in September. And then the farmers had got together, I think it was over 30 unions, and decided they were going to march to Delhi and protest there. And during that period, them trying to cut across several, I think it was 1 or 2 states to get into Delhi, they did face a lot of ostensibly oppression, tear gas, water cannons, and other kind of abuses. But they were able to get right to the border of Delhi, and now they're camped at several sites there since basically the end of November. And I think it was on December 3rd, it was a complete shutdown of the country. So I think it was 250 million people went on strike in support of these farmers.
So the legislation, the response to that legislation, that started in the fall of last year.
That's correct. Yeah, the laws were passed in September, and they decided to march to Delhi end of November.
Dupinder, what can you tell us about the current situation?
Right. So the current situation, as we all know, nothing's really changed since they've started protesting peacefully and settling around the borders of Delhi. We do know, 60% of income or lifestyle basically comes from the agriculture and the farming sort of careers that people have there. It's more of a profession for them, even though we don't see it that way. We normally see agriculture and we see maybe sort of the background of unawareness or not being educated in those areas, and maybe that's why people take on farming. But when you get to know some of the farmers, they're very well versed in their agricultural fields. They have, some of them carry PhDs even. They know their lands, they know how to grow the crops and the essential needs that people need out there. And so for this to be occurring where the government is not taking a stand of sort of supporting them in their state protection of those fields is a huge concern. And that is one of the reasons they have continued to protest. And not only our ancestors have sort of the background in agriculture, it's for the next generation as well, which makes a huge impact overall on the people of India. Agriculture doesn't just come from Punjab, it comes from Haryana, it comes from many, many different areas, although majority are Sikh. And the Sikh Punjabi do, have a large portion of their areas that they field in. And so basically, the current situation is that nothing has changed there. And for the government to, not even sort of consider what these farmers are protesting for is not only disheartening, but a huge concern in the middle of COVID, as you've mentioned. We're putting their lives at stake here. There's been many farmers who have gone missing through these protests. There's many who have been detained for just peacefully protesting. There have been many who have died. And that is, one of the reasons that I stepped into wanting to help out the farmer protests within Canada here. For that reason being, they need that support internationally if nationally they are not receiving it. As I said, the population is huge. A lot of the agriculture is dependent on the farmers. And at the end of the day, if we're opening up the markets to private investors, we are putting their life and livelihood at stake. And so, and the next generation also along with it.
So what are the Sikh farmers asking for?
So basically, there's 3 ordinances that the government has put in place where it generates the bigger corporations the right to kind of negotiate the pricing of the produce and or the crops that are essential to the needs of the people in India. And so basically what that does is it's putting farmers overall, we know for many years they've faced suicide and death as it is, because the current state laws were already not protecting them well enough from bankruptcy. And so what this has done is now it's opened it up to a larger market where the government support is not really there. And so therefore bigger private corporations can come in and private investors can come in and kind of take over these markets. And so we're putting not only the markets at stake, but we're also putting the essential sort of produce at stake, or the crops that they do produce at stake here, because they can really the farmers are dependent. This is their livelihood. So if they're not getting the prices or meeting the needs to bring in that an earned income back home, then we are basically creating a crisis situation here overall in the long term.
Thank you. Sharon, can you say a little something about the impacts here?
Sure. So, you know, for me, the farmers' protest is kind of a lightning rod moment into many things that we've seen globally taking place in Canada, North America, across the world, in terms of systems of fighting oppression. And we've seen this in terms of our local context with Black Lives Matters, for example, and fighting of you know, systems of power, systems of fascism, systems that continue to step on the neck of those who are powerless in many ways, who because of those fascist governments. And when the farmers' protest began 153 days ago, so you know, we're 5 months into the farmers' protest, to me it was this yes, it's everything Dupinder and Jindi have mentioned in terms of, you know, the farmer suicides taking place across the subcontinent because they're already disenfranchised in so many ways. But it really was a percolating of fascism and a percolating of Hindutva ideology and systems of power and, you know, casteism that continues to perpetuate in India. And this was like this moment where hundreds of thousands of people said no more, right? It was in direct response to the farm laws, but those farm laws represent people's livelihoods. We're talking about more than 60% of the population who rely on this for their well-being, their nurturing, their sustenance, right? And not only that, looking at it from a global perspective, I really want people in the room and the audience who are listening to understand this isn't just about what's happening over there. It's not just about, you know, what's happening in India. We're talking about things that we ingest and we eat that comes from India, right? We're all on this turmeric love fest when we spend $20 for a cup of coffee in expensive coffee shops. We're loving our ginger, we're loving our lentils, we're all on these fad diets, but where does all that come from? And from a global perspective, we have to attune ourselves to the suffering that is taking place in India. The video that I wanted to start off with, to me, just exemplifies everything. Like, you look at the wrinkles on the hands of the seniors and the elder generations who are protesting, sleeping on the streets, sleeping on the munges. This isn't a protest where it's young, well-bodied, able people only. We're talking about an intergenerational protest like we've never seen before, and it still didn't get the recognition that it deserved until Rihanna posted something. It didn't get the level of recognition that it should have worldwide and internationally until Rihanna posted something, right? And if we're going to talk about impacts, what it's really exploded and uncovered is the fascist government that many of us already knew existed. And that's why there's been such a censorship, such a violent doxing of those of us who've been speaking out against the farmers' protest. My friends have been doxed and threatened, their livelihoods and lives threatened. You're talking about a machine that is trying everything and anything it can to stop protest for a livelihood of farming. And we'll talk more about how it impacts the diaspora here, but to me, this is what the farmers' protest represents. It represents everything on a global scale of what we've been seeing this year alone. And so I think that answered the question on why it matters so much. And to, you know, 5 months later, we're still, like Dupinder said, sitting in the same spot we were, you know, and every time I watch that video, it brings me to tears because I look at the wrinkles on the hands. I look at the women who are holding pictures of their sons who've committed suicide, right? The depth and layers of what's taking place run so deep that we all must attune ourselves to what is taking place.
Yeah, and you mentioned the suicides. It's not something that I had really been that aware of. I certainly knew there was a loss of life, but I can appreciate it's not only because people are losing a livelihood, but this is also an identity. Being a farmer is an identity. It's part of your culture. And I imagine in many cases, these farms are have been in families for a very long time as well. So you're losing a connection to the past too.
It's also a bit of a privileged identity too, right? And that's what's been amazing about the farmers' protest is the inclusivity of Dalit farm workers, those who are considered, who've been oppressed for centuries in the Indian subcontinent, or considered the quote lower castes. You're seeing a rise in movement of Dalit farm workers stepping up. They're the ones who work on the farmlands owned by a lot of the quote higher caste farm land owning people. So, but you're seeing, women protesting. You're seeing such an interesting rise in voice through the farmers' protest. And I think that's, to me, what's the impact as well, is who's stepping up, and who. And the next question will be, how will they continue to be given that platform and voice going forward? It can't just be in this moment only. It needs to be, what do we do next as well?
So really, this is an event that's going to change democracy in a lot of ways in India. Sharn, you mentioned how this has an impact on the diaspora, and what are some of those connections between the farmers' protest and this month, in particular here in Canada and BC, as we're celebrating Sikh Heritage Month?
So I think I've seen young Sikhs, young South Asians in British Columbia in particular, attune themselves to the process of farming, and also learning the histories of farming traditions, or the way that the agricultural laws have impacted Punjab for decades. You're seeing young people attune themselves to history and activism. You're seeing themselves attach themselves to their Sikh identity, because as Sikhs, we're supposed to fight oppression, right? It's inculcated in our history and who we are, not just if it's about us, if it's about anybody, right? Like it is, we fight oppressors across many different stories and histories. It isn't just when it impacts us. So I've seen young people step up in these protests, and I'm not seeing it as a performative only. I'm really seeing it as an embodying understanding of, this is our identity. This is who we are. And I'm hoping it'll become more of an activism that also teaches them to unpack the casteism that exists in their communities. I hope it teaches them to understand what are the privileges they may have coming from land owning, farm owning families, like you mentioned. So the impact is definitely in that way in the diaspora. But as I mentioned before, I think another impact has been the power of the diaspora to shake the democracy of India. A lot of people keep saying, stay out of our issues, stay out of our, like people in India, right? You had Bollywood actors responding with their fake tweets saying, stay out of our issues, stay out of our issues. It was because of a movement in the diaspora that Greta Thunberg, spoke out about the toolkit, right? It was because of the movement in the diaspora that people are so rattled, the IIT cells are so rattled that they're doxing anybody and anybody who speaks out against the farmers' protest. To me, that's a form of success, because what you're doing is rattling kind of the structural systems of power that maybe those who are sitting there can't do, right? We have the privilege of voice. We have the privilege of freedom to speak. So I think that's what has really shown me the impacts in the diaspora.
Dupinder, do you want to pick up on that? I know you've been involved in organizing the protests, some of the protests that people have been seeing here in BC. What does it mean to people here in BC and Canada to protest this? What are some of the hopes that people have when they're going out there?
Right. So just like Sharn touched on, it's very close to heart. A lot of us consider this to be where the roots that we came from. And so when it comes to the protests out here, understanding the concept that we need to be speaking up for those that are oppressed on the other side of the world, if they aren't able to accomplish their mission on their own out there. Having that global support is very important, when it comes to emotions, when it comes to moral support, when it comes to their mental health even, because knowing that they are supported, they carry on, they become that much stronger. And that's very important, I think, for globally for a community. And, you know, the number one thing is, you know, getting those laws revoked. We don't know how long it could take. We didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And to see our seniors, just as Sharon said, sitting out there, you know, protesting in such a way that we've never seen them do, you know, do something like this before, was really not only touching to us, but also made us that much stronger internationally. We felt like if they can do it, why are we just sitting at home and not being able to go out and support them? And you know, in Sikhi, as Sharon said, that is one of the you know, biggest things that we teach, is that when somebody's being oppressed, you stand for them, you be their voice for them. And so I think, you know, especially when we talk about international students, like just with the protests, we've seen so much more support for them as well, because them being here, they feel kind of sort of divided. Their attention is back home with the parents and their grandparents who are sitting at the borders, but yet they're here trying to, you know, do their education, trying to complete their studies, trying to make a living out here. And for them, it's taken a toll on their mental health as well. And so basically, at the end of the day, by seeing that we are supporting protests out and about across the globe, international students also feel supported. So you're supporting morally at different levels. And the other thing is that if we take a look at, you know, just ourselves as human beings, you know, we would want that sort of support ourselves if we were facing similar sort of situations. If in Canada we were facing the same sort of concerns out here, we would definitely want this international level and global support that we're, you know, trying to provide for our seniors back home and the generations to come. And Sharon, as she's mentioned, you know, farming is a huge industry. Everything we eat comes from crops, comes from our land, soil. And so just that, you know, with that being said, that was enough for many of us to step up and say, you know what, we need to be doing something about this. We need to get out and take a stand and actually go and protest. How we wanted to protest was a different story, because people are doing it in various ways. And I think everything is correct, you know, in whatever way you choose to do it. Some are standing on street corners, some are doing Kassan sleepouts. Some are actually, you know, taking their families and standing at their own street corners. So what we decided to do with Basmati Wave, which is one of the protests that we had come to do out in Victoria there on the lawn in front of the legislature, was to make a point that our political stance needs to be stronger as Canadians. You know, when we say human rights issues, we speak on many different human rights issues. And so for this, we were quite surprised that it wasn't, the government here wasn't taking as strong of a stance. And you know, through that Basmati Wave, we've been able to challenge our politicians to take a stand, to speak up, and we have been successful in many different areas across Canada because of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Jindi, speaking of the protest on the legislature lawn, I saw in the photographs a large collection of shoes sitting on the steps. Can you tell me what that was symbolizing?
So the idea of the shoes, at that time, about 200 farmers had passed away at the protest sites, either through illness or unfortunately committing suicide, or, you know, death by suicide, because of their frustrations that the government wasn't listening to them after many failed talks. So we want to you know, we had these traditional kind of Indian shoes that are worn there, and we placed those there on the lawn just to show the magnitude of what was happening in India with the farmers who were protesting. And you know, the sad thing is, you know, but as the protest continued, the number went way past 200. And you know, it was sad to have gotten to that point. You know, one death is too many, and 200 sounded just horrific. And then suddenly we were in the 300s, and you know, I think it was a few dying almost every couple of days, and it just shocked us to the core. to see that, and we wanted to show something that was visual and really made people understand the emotional and physical impact that protesting out on the streets was having on the farmers. And I've seldom visited India, but I've got an acute sense of just silly things like the weather change. So a lot of NGOs, like including ours, were busy supplying a lot of clothing and blankets and other things for the farmers during the winter, and within a week or two, suddenly we're hitting now temperatures of 40 degrees Celsius, and now we're switching over to providing coolants and things like that. But it really shows you what they're having to bear with out there for months, just to have this government change its mind on this, or on these kind of controversial laws. And in fact, my own feeling is that what we're seeing now with COVID is another symptom of the way this government has behaved. Several states in India are having their state level elections, and the government's attention has been on there. So they're desperate to win in Bengal, and that's all they focused on. And you can just look at their kind of tweets and things like that. That's what they're talking about. So horrifically, on Saturday, the whole world was hearing about what was happening, and yet the BJP, the party, was posting, if we win in Bengal, everyone will get a free vaccine. So the tone deafness of this kind of nationalist government is just unbelievable. And even now that, they're saying, oh, we will build oxygen plants, we will do this, we will do that, but it's the outside world that's going to have to come in and help. Yeah. And I think that is going to hurt them a lot more, because they've presented this strongman image, but it's been quite hollow. We're getting, just talking about the COVID, we're getting messages every day from people we don't even know, asking for either medication or oxygen, and it's heartbreaking. I was planning to get something to somebody today, but within hours they passed away. And it describes the behavior of this government. With the farmers' protest, essentially those three laws were to privatize the industry and have these farmers be victim to kind of predatory pricing, and small landholders would have disappeared, which is what the vast majority of these farmers are. They wouldn't have been able to compete against large corporations who are, who would have been allowed to purchase their crops and then dictate the price of that crop.
Thank you. I want to jump to a question here. This question is from Aaron, and it's so well written. I'm going to read it all out, and then we might need to break it down to answer it all. But Aaron asks, is it going to change democracy as mentioned? Certainly there's a push to want to, but aren't we so far away from achieving that goal? Isn't the Modi response just to ignore and push forward with its own racist totalitarian agenda? Saran and Jindi both say or imply we are in the same place as months ago. What are the signals of what is going to change next, for better or worse? What should we expect to happen next?
Well, yeah, so, it's unfortunate we don't know the outcome, as we've mentioned before, and how long this can proceed. However, given the situation with COVID at hand, we also see that the government is facing a lot more crisis in different areas, as well as the farmers' protest now. So that might help, as it's unfortunate we're losing multiple individuals out there right now. And almost what I'm hearing is like one death happening every 6 minutes, is what I've been hearing, which is a sad situation. And for the government to continue to allow not only the COVID situation the way it's going, but farmers to be sitting on the borders of Delhi with the situation going on, obviously there's no democracy there, it's dictatorship, you know, and it's a really sort of a dictating way of I would say getting rid of individuals per se. But at the end of it all, if we take a look at the government, if they are wanting to continue governing, then I think they will have to make some sort of move at this point, especially with the crisis at hand, COVID and farmers' protests both going on.
Jindi, what are you? Oh, Sharon, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think part of the, so you are right. I don't think it's a simple solution or an answer to how will India return back to being a democracy, because there are actually many layers and issues undergirding. Like, as I said, it's been percolating for actually many decades, what's kind of erupted now. Modi isn't necessarily the kind of one person who's caused all this. He's the symptom of a larger problem that's been taking place in India. So I don't necessarily think solving Modi, repealing the laws is going to be the only answer to things that are much deeper percolating in India in terms of oppression of minorities of different religious backgrounds, or, you know, different caste groups or things like that. So it's not necessarily the only answer, but I do think the push and the fact that the farmers have been sitting there for 5 months is a continuing protest that is showing that there is much support all across, you know, India in many different ways. There are people who still support Modi, even in this COVID kind of response. There are people who refuse to acknowledge the government's lack of response in the way COVID has been dealt with recently. So that group of people will always be there. But I think because of the international pressure taking place, so the diaspora once again plays a huge role. And then we have governments within international spaces, right? So like people in the UK Parliament, up to the municipality levels in different cities who are speaking out. Each of that has an impact, because don't forget, we have consulates sitting in every major city across North America and, you know, Europe and the diaspora. We have Indian consulates, and let me tell you, they're watching, right? They're watching everything to see who is speaking out, who is aware of what's happening, and how can we best try to protect India's reputation. Well, I think we've already passed that notch. Like, I think we're beyond trying to protect India's reputation. We're now trying to figure out how are we going to keep the pressure on internationally. So I think continuing to push locally has a ripple effect where India, whatever India is, whatever the governmental powers, the BJP, down to the prime minister, they are certainly taking notice. So I agree with Dupinder. I think that there is going to be, I hope, a resolution because of that pressure.
Thank you. And this it leads nicely into another question here from Anita. Dupinder mentioned how the diaspora support is important and how it creates awareness and makes the Modi government more accountable to a larger community. And this is very important when you're dealing with a fascist state. That being said, how has our local government and politicians stepped up and supported? Is this impactful? And how can we show them how important that it is to get them to do something? Especially in cities like Abbotsford and Surrey that have large Punjabi communities and that are deeply affected by this. Jindi, do you want to take that to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to look at the government's reaction here at kind of at three levels. Right at the beginning, the Prime Minister had talked about his concern for the right to peacefully protest. He hadn't talked about the laws, and one wouldn't expect him to talk about another country's laws, but at least he did raise the issue of these farmers not being allowed to peacefully protest. And India obviously took that quite harshly and started, you know, throwing accusations his way about what, you know, he's saying, and they were kind of changing the narrative a little bit. But, you know, at the provincial level, I've noticed it's been a bit more difficult, and I suspect, like in the prairies, we haven't had as much of a positive response. They've been a little bit more pro-government, Indian government, and that's because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I think when Sharon mentioned pulses earlier, I think India doesn't realize that a good chunk of the pulses they eat come from Canada and chickpeas and things like that. So they don't want that being impacted, so that they didn't say much in the prairies. But over here in BC, when we did the protest at the lawn, we did have the Premier make a statement. But I think what's been more heartening is at the municipal level. We've had a lot of motions passed in many cities, and I believe Surrey passed theirs today in support of the Indian farmers. And you know, these, when you bring these cities together, they represent millions of Canadians. You know, Victoria passed one last week, Vancouver, Surrey did, Brampton in Ontario, and a handful of others as well. But I think at that level, it makes a big difference knowing that your local government supports what you're kind of concerned about and fighting for.
I know in terms of Abbotsford, Anita asked about Abbotsford. Abbotsford has not yet said anything publicly, and many of us, including me, have been pushing for our mayor and councillors to put out a statement like New West and Victoria and Vancouver, and I think Surrey has as well, like a lot of the municipal cities in British Columbia. I think a part of that is just kind of institutional racism and a lack of understanding of how these issues are Canadian issues just by default of the fact that it impacts Canadians, right? Like we're talking about Canadians who have family members who are protesters. You're talking about Canadians who maybe farm or land opening. You're talking about Canadians who came as a part of intergenerational trauma, right? Like I saw a really powerful protest sign of three men. So it was a grandpa, his son, and his grandson, and they each held a sign that said, "I faced oppression in 1947." And then the dad says, "I faced oppression in 1984." And then the son said, "I faced oppression in 2020," or "I'm seeing oppression in 2020. And you're talking about 3 generations of trauma based out of that kind of South Asia, Indian subcontinent. And those threads of trauma continue to this very day. Right? Those threads of trauma that we're talking about are connected to a lack of resources being put into Punjab, or water being taken away from Punjab, which means 5 rivers. These are all interconnected. And that's why, Aaron, your question is actually so much more complicated, right? And it affects Canadians. It affects those who have trauma from these countries. And not understanding that and constantly having to explain and justify your humanity in a way to these municipalities is incredibly hurtful and frustrating. And so we'll continue to push City of Abbotsford to speak out and say something, and I'm hoping that they will. I know Brad Viss is a Conservative MP in Abbotsford, and he, as far as I know, is the only one who's actually put out like motions in what's it called? I'm so bad at politics, like in the House of Commons or in Parliament. And he's faced pushback amongst his own Conservatives. And I've met with him and I've spoken with him, and you know, it's not easy to be speaking out like that. But the imperative is a moral, ethical imperative that we're talking about on a global scale. So how much do we keep having to justify our humanity and keep having to justify our histories and stories to say, please, can you speak out? Can you say something? So it's frustrating, and you can sense my frustration, and it comes from a place of pain as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, the politicians that have actually spoken out, you know, we got to give them credit. At the same time, still keep pushing on forward, like Sharon said, in areas where it hasn't been. When it comes to Anita's question as to, you know, how is this sort of gonna help us or affect us in the long run? If we look at, again, Canadian human rights, you know, we speak on many different levels, many different issues. If our politicians are able to speak against the oppression that is happening on the other side of the world, that is huge for us when it comes to the reputation of India, as Sharon has mentioned. When it comes to publicly supporting the actual residents or citizens of this country who have immigrated here, who have faced oppression maybe in previous decades or generations. So to give us that support on their behalf is huge, and India knows that, and that is why the backlash sometimes happens And that is why some of the politicians are afraid to speak up, to be honest. It is a matter of, they have trades going on with these countries. They have certain levels of relation with these countries. And for them, it's a matter of the fine line. Do we speak or do we not? But at the end of the day, if they are supporting their own citizens, I mean, that is a huge step forward for us.
Thank you. Well, it has come to that time in the evening when we'll start to wrap up, but I want to offer you each a chance to give us either last thoughts or comments on this, or let folks know about something maybe that's coming up that they could lend their voices to, or get more information from. So Jindi, I see you are not muted. I'm going to start with you.
I would say don't forget India. Right now, obviously our focus rightfully is on COVID. With the organization I work for, we're working long hours trying to get as much kind of COVID relief items to the citizens of India. But this farmers issue is not going to go away. And today it's a farmers law. Tomorrow it will be another law, and it's just drive to privatize India and sell it to those capitalists and companies that are in favor with the government is what all Indians should worry about. So this is going to go on for a while. Hopefully, the opposition in India will get stronger. But I would say out here, it's been a long stretch for many of us who've been working closely with assisting the protests and other things for the farmers' protests, but don't forget them. They're still out there on the streets even today, even with the COVID crisis.
Thank you. Dupinder.
Yeah, I'm gonna, add to what Jindi has said, and I want to thank Khalsa Aid first of all for, the relief work they're doing out there for COVID, the COVID situation. Given the fact that the farmers still have to or are fighting for their rights at the borders, which makes this whole situation much more sort of dangerous on its own. At the same time, fighting for the rights is just as important. But to have organizations like Khalsa Aid or others out there supporting farmers, that is, again, very heartwarming for us to see. And there are organizations around in different areas around the world helping out as much as they can as well, with both the farmers' protests and COVID as well, currently within India. So, whether it's Kisan Sleep Out, Basmati Wave Challenge, if you want to join a protest or want to get to know about one, you can always look on, there's much going on social media right now, different organizations stepping up in different various ways. There's some protests happening in London, England, I know. And so people are still continuing the wave, and we're hoping that the resolution comes up soon, and this is put to us, sort of an end where our seniors and our farmers are actually gaining from it.
Are there any social media channels or hashtags you want to mention in particular?
Sure, you can follow Basmati Wave, which is Basmati Wave _challenge on Instagram, and you can also, Kisan Sleep Out is just exactly that, Kisan Sleep Out. Kisan Sleep Out is having, they're doing a sleep out in England and in London, I believe it's May 6th, if I'm not wrong, or May 8th. And there is one happening here on April 30th at the Vancouver Art Gallery. So if anybody wants to join that, that'll be from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. will be the protest taking place, and then 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. will be the actual sleep out. So you can always follow those two channels. There's a lot of others out there that are doing their protests. There's protests happening on street corners at 72 and Scott Road daily in Surrey, as well as 88 and King George. And in Richmond, we have protests happening on Stevenson Highway.
Thank you. Janet is asking, how can we donate? Where does it do the most good? Jindi.
I was going to say Jindi should answer that.
I mean, donating to this cause is difficult. I mean, our group, Khalsa Aid, made a point of saying that we are not collecting funds for this. One of those, and even for the COVID relief, but one of those reasons is that the Indian government does not allow you to send money to charities in India. So the work around that is to do almost a kind of a business to business, find somebody in India who you can purchase stuff from and then have a local team distribute it. So that's been the issue. And a lot of people do ask about the donations. We're having this kind of same issue now where people are very angry about and very saddened about what's happening right now in India. And I always argue that more than the donations, it's amplifying the issue. The more people that retweet or just, talk to their social circles and describe what's happening, that I personally believe has a bigger impact than donating. I mean, I'm not going to lie, that donating helps. It helps us run our operations. But for things like the farmers' protests, especially, let's be honest, news cycles move on, to keep on talking about it, whether it's online or in the real world, that's much more important, I personally believe.
Thank you for the question, Janet.
Maybe if I can, there's a question in the chat, if I can answer that, if that's okay. So Anita just said if there's one more question, space or time. So recently 2 events were canceled on the farmers' protest at UBC and SFU due to Hartosh Bal, who's a journalist. I think he writes for The Caravan, which is a well-known Indian magazine journal. I'm not 100% sure what it is. So he was canceled due to a lot of Sikh-led organizations and concerns from the community. So she's asking, I was interested in knowing how the panel feels about that. So I'd like to jump in with my thoughts, and feel free, Dupinder and Jindi as well, please, to share. So, I don't support hate speech on campuses, and I'm an academic, right? So I'm very mindful of this idea of academic freedom being used to harbor hate and allowing it, because that's happened, right? At UBC there have been hate groups who've come, or whatever, like different types of groups who harm. So I'm against that. But I do believe that there should be a chance to engage with people in a respectful platform. But I also believe that transparency of the conversation should take place. So I'm going to answer your question in a really weird way. In this case, I think the questioning should have been allowed for Hartosh Bal to be questioned by the community, because there have been concerning things that he's said and written when it comes to human rights injustices against Sikhs. My concern would have been, would that have been allowed, right? Like, would there have been opportunities from the community in a respectful way to question, and question based on citing, question based on, history. So I don't know if that would have been allowed, or how that would have been gatekept at both events, SFU and UBC. The other thing I really do want to mention is that I feel like Hartosh separates human rights violations against Sikhs and separates the farmers' protests, right? And he says they're separate issues. So he has a very strong opinion as a relative of somebody who's seen as being somebody who's committed violence on Sikhs in the 80s and 90s. So he's related to somebody. He's a nephew of someone who did that. So he seems to separate the two issues, whereas those of us, and I would agree, say you actually can't separate the two, because you're talking about human rights violations that have continued from that moment in the 80s to today. I think Dupinder mentioned that there have been farmers gone missing. There have been journalists who've been oppressed. There have been relatives of well-known farmers protesters who've been, trigger warning here, but sexually violated in prison and harmed, right? So those issues cannot be separated, and to try to separate them is doing a huge disservice to the larger systemic issues. So for that reason, I think Hartosh should be questioned, and he should be questioned in a way that's transparent. So I don't know if that answers the question, Anita. I am pretty conflicted about, how all this came down to be. I believe in Sikh Heritage Month, Sikh means to be a learner, be a critical human being, being questioning. We need to question and learn through that process as well. So I don't know if just demanding that event not happen is the way for us to move forward. I don't know if there's a way that could have been done where we can question the journalist, right? Question the integrity of what he wrote in a place that allowed us to engage in that dialogue. So that's kind of my answer. Jindi, I don't know if you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, the repercussions of the cancellation at UBC and then the postponement at SFU was that it was these kind of activists or radicals who didn't want him to speak. But if you look at the dialogue, and I was full disclaimer, involved at least online discussing this, and actually I had a piece come out on Bars News today about my peculiar kind of view on this. The students wanted to have a discussion with him prior to the event to really understand his views. And initially they said no, because they said it's a separate issue. And then when the community outrage got larger, they said, well, you can just do it in the discussion section at the end, which is very dismissive of the issue. My own take on it, my biggest concern was this kind of almost aggressive dismissal of the number of people that were killed during the 80s and 90s. And the fact is, we truly do not know. And the problem is the fact that there's a vagueness around the number that's used politically by kind of both sides of the issue. And it does a disservice to those whose families were massively impacted and still continue to be impacted by what happened, either they lost a family member or were tortured. So my take is that I'm very sensitive to someone who's very dismissive of the numbers or exaggerates the numbers of people tortured and killed. And instead, there should be the political will for a full truth commission with testimonials and a survey just to understand what happened in the Punjab. Because I think you kind of touched upon an important point. What the state learned in how to oppress during the Punjab period, it then used that model in Kashmir and is using that model now with the farmers. So it is something to learn. And for a state, if it truly believes in democracy and wants to be healthy and strengthen its institutions, it needs to have something like a truth commission to completely understand what happened in the past and how to avoid that ever happening again.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the questions that came from those folks who joined us tonight, the attendees who are here. Thank you for the panelists for being so thoughtful and open in sharing in your answers, and hopefully letting us all think a little more critically and openly about what's happening and how we are connected to this event in India and how the outcome of it is going to have an impact that's felt globally. So I hope that those voices continue to be heard and opportunities continue for people to support and to assist however they can. Again, I'm so grateful for all of you being here. This has been recorded, and so it will go on to the YouTube, Royal BC Museum's YouTube channel in the next few days. So please have a look there for it if you'd like to share it on your social media. Just let more people know. We'd appreciate that too. If you're an educator here in the room tonight, I will point out Sikh Heritage BC, Sikh Heritage Month BC. If you visit their website, they have some great resources, including an educator's resource for the farmers' protest, so you can talk about this in your classrooms. Well, thank you all very much, and good night.
Thanks, Kim.
Good night.
Thanks, Dupinder and Jindi.
Thank you.
Bye.